Before we begin, if I can make a request from the youth, can move forward, please. Our elders are standing and saying without support, so I believe we can do it too, inshallah. The goal today, inshallah ta'ala, is to understand a component of our lives that we have been born with as people who have been born with the religion of Islam by the fadl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We all know the level that the Quran holds within our lives, and we understand that it is something, it's a book that we must continuously engage with in order to become closer to. However, with our daily routines, the dunya calling us, our work, our school, our families, our responsibilities, it's very easy for us to disregard the effect of leaving the Quran out of our daily routine. Because if we don't work for a month, we can see the effect of that outwardly and the disaster that that causes immediately. And if we don't eat for 3 days, we can see the effect and the problem that that causes for us immediately. But the effects of leaving the Quran outside of our lives, outside of our daily routine, it is something that sneaks up on the individual who has been affected with that problem. And most of the time, it is not until they have unfortunately reached a very, very, let's say, problematic state that they realize the effect of the action of leaving the Quran. So therefore, the goal that we have today, inshallah ta'ala, in our time before Isha, is that we will go over what exactly is the Quran, and how exactly do I become a companion of the Quran. As the Prophet ﷺ told us about the Sahib al-Quran, and the word he used here is very important. We must consider the language of the Prophet ﷺ at a worldly, at the level of each word, in the sense that Prophet ﷺ did not use any words on accident. So he did not say the Qari al-Quran, he did not say the Hamil al-Quran, he did not say the reader of the Quran, he did not say the carrier of the Quran, which is the word that they used for the Hufaz at the time. But rather he used the Sahib al-Quran. And the Sahib al-Quran is the companion of the Quran. So that individual does not have to memorize the Quran. Rather, he has to have the Quran as his best friend throughout his daily routine. And it is not only limited to reading. Only reading the Quran is one aspect of that relationship, which we'll go over. But rather, there are other aspects with which we get closer to the Quran, and the Quran becomes our companion throughout our day. And the hadith goes on to state, it will be said to the Sahib al-Quran on the Day of Judgment, اقرأ وارتقي, that you should read and elevate, because your level will be at the level of the last ayah that you read. And so this in and of itself, it shows us that as we go through the process of making the Quran a part of our daily lives, most definitely that in and of itself is a qualification for Al-Jannah. And the goal for all of us here in this world is to attain that. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created al-maut and al-haya, life and death, or death and life here, so that it may be shown and tested who will do the best of deeds. And the Quran is a crucial focal point of being a person who does the best of deeds. It's involved in almost every single deed in our religion. So the first thing that we want to go over when it comes to the Quran is its miraculous level in our religion. And we know that all of the prophets that were sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we know about in the Quran, they all had some miracles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them out of His divine wisdom. And when it comes to Musa alayhi salam, we know that at that time, what was the common trend of the society was for each and every individual to be enamored with the science of magic. And everybody was looking out, who's the best magician? What's the best magic trick that came out recently? X, Y, and Z. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a prophet with a miracle that destroyed and showed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation can overcome and outdo all of these quote-unquote tricks that these magicians that are misguided are doing, who ended up being guided by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see in the time of Isa alayhi salam that at that time healing and medicine was the societal outrage. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a prophet whose miracle again showed that there was absolutely no way that the individual doing this is doing it of his own power and accord. Because even the dead, who no doctor can bring back to life, when the death comes, we know that it's final. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Isa alayhi salam the power that even the dead would be raised back to life by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He cured the lepers in a manner which others could not do. And He had other miracles and so on and so forth. And so lastly, we come to our book, the Quran, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in which we understand that the Arabic language, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was preparing it to be able to be the carrier and facilitator of this book for centuries beforehand. Even to this day, if an individual wants to truly understand the Quran and its meanings of the more complex words, they will go back to the high-level poems that were written in the time of Jahiliyyah to understand exactly what this word meant before, and therefore we can now understand the context with which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using this word now. And the celebrities of that time were the people who were the best poets. And the Prophet ﷺ was given a book that all of the best poets, they knew that there is no way that any person can come up with the speech, to the point where they would now make excuses and say that this is some type of magic, or he's a soothsayer, and so on and so forth. And they would even cover their ears when they heard the Quran, because they were so scared that these words of truth would enter their heart and they'd become believers. So this in and of itself should show us the power that the Quran holds in its language. And our goal should be to unlock that component that was so evident to the people that the Quran was revealed to at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that this book is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this language is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's absolutely no way a human individual can make this up from his own accord. So, to now understand the Quran itself, number one, it's the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are rewarded for its recitation. Every single letter, we know from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, is given 10 rewards for its recitation. And the Prophet ﷺ went on to clarify that he does not say Alif Lam Mim is one letter, but rather Alif Lam Mim is three letters. So the reward we can gain from reciting the Quran in and of itself is it would take a lot of effort to even count it. So now we also have to understand the difference between the inzal of the Quran and the nuzul of the Quran. The inzal of the Quran is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealing the Quran in one shot from Allah. There's difference of opinion here, but from Allah al-Mahfuz to the lowest heaven. Okay? And this is what we hear when we recite Surah Al-Qadr. Inna anzalnahu fi laylatul Qadr. That the Quran was revealed in that night. Not meaning that the whole Quran was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ in one single night, but rather it was brought down to the lowest heaven in that night. And then we have a nuzul. This is now the revelation that occurred throughout the life of the Prophet ﷺ throughout the 23 years that he was given nubuwwah, that he was given prophethood. And there are many lessons to be taken from this. The Prophet ﷺ was faced with criticism from his opponents that they would ask him, why was this Quran not revealed jumlatan wahida, at one moment, at one instant, all of it together? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded and revealed in the Quran in Surah Al-Furqan, كَذَلِكَ لِنُثَبِّتَ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ, that rather this is to strengthen your heart, to strengthen your soul. And so, what do we understand from this and why is that the case? Number one, we have to take into account our human element in this regard, in the sense that every single human being, we become desensitized to things over time. And this is a mercy and a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because when we face tragedies, after a while, the pain dissipates. But also, when we face blessings, and the Quran is the greatest blessing that we can ever have in our lives after Iman, and even when that book enters our lives or enters the lives of the Sahaba or the Prophet ﷺ, if it came all in one go, then after some time, its effects would wear off on the individual. That also teaches us that as individuals, we have to have a daily routine with the Quran. Because if I just read it once a week, I become less and more desensitized and less able to accept and act upon those words that I'm reading. And what happens at that stage is that once a week becomes once every 2 weeks, and once every 2 weeks become once every 3 weeks, and so on and so forth until it gets opened once a year, and when I'll do that, even less than that. So we see here that the Quran is a book that requires daily attention so that it can strengthen our hearts and souls and give us that motivation to increase, as the Prophet ﷺ reminds us in the hadith, جَدِّدُوا إِيمَانَكُمْ, renew your iman. And the Sahaba asked him, how do we do that, O Rasulullah ﷺ? And his advice in that hadith was to increase in the statement of La ilaha illallah. And the lesson we take from this is that our iman itself wears out. So it's important for us to make sure that we use the Quran as a tool to ensure that as our iman decreases, as we know, al-imanu zid wa yanqud, that we have to make sure that our iman, as it goes down, we use the Quran as a tool to make sure that we are renewing it and strengthening it. Idhnillahi ta'ala. So now we can go over how the Quran elevates the things that become attached to it. The Quran is in and of itself a book that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored greatly. For example, all of the other books that were sent down to the prophets before the Quran are no longer with us in their pure form. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose the Quran as the book that will remain as a guidance in its pure unadulterated form until the end of time. And so therefore, we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made this a book of great importance. And this in and of itself should be a factor in our hearts, in the sense that when it comes to importance and the value that we attach to things, when something is endorsed by an individual, this is a very common tactic in marketing, that if I want to sell a shoe, I get the person who can run the fastest and jump the highest to sell the shoe. If I want to sell a snack, I get a cartoon character and put it on the snack, so that when the kids see it, they attach that to the product and they hold to it an importance. And we see this amongst ourselves as human beings. But now we have to ask ourselves, what is the reaction when we understand that the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran, is the book that He held the most important? He stamped it as the most important book. And from there, we have to judge what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means to us in our hearts. Because if I can feel a connection to a product, that I must buy it, it's so important, because a human being has told me or has claimed that it can do X, Y, and Z for me. But when I understand that the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, number one, delivered by the most important and perfect human being, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that does not motivate myself to be an individual who works harder to make sure that that endorsement from the Prophet ﷺ, from the Sahaba, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself means something to me, so that I can achieve my goals as a believer and become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself through His book. So we see that the Prophet ﷺ was a prophet amongst prophets, and he was given the Quran and he became the greatest of prophets. And we know that Laylatul Qadr was a night from the nights. And we know that Laylatul Qadr was a night from the nights, and with the Quran being revealed in that night by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it became the best of nights. And Ramadan being a month from all of the months, and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choosing to reveal the Quran in that month, or begin the revelation of the Quran in that month, it became the best of months. And this trend is something that continued to occur in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And to this day, the Prophet ﷺ would always prefer the individuals who knew the most Quran. Meaning that when the Quran becomes attached to something, its rank in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases. And as we all worry about our status and where we fall as human beings in our hierarchy socially, it's more important for us to understand and try our best to raise our status in the hierarchy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has determined for us, and to understand the consequences that the people of the past didn't care about when it came to reaching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure and reaching a level of greatness in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When it came to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, a lowly individual on the social hierarchy at the time of in the Mecca amongst the Quraysh. However, he was an individual who memorized a lot of the Quran. And he became the first Sahaba to recite the Quran publicly, and he was beaten for it to near death. But that was not a deterrent for him. And for us in this day and age, by the will and mercy and bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're allowed to practice our religion freely. And there are no physical deterrents that stop us from memorizing Quran or from taking time to enroll in a Quran program and so on and so forth. No one will come by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and arrest an individual for saying, I want to recite the Quran wherever I want to. However, unfortunately, we now have deterrence from the shaitan and other aspects and avenues. Well, what will happen to me or to that individual, to my son or to my daughter or whatever? Will they become a failure? Will they lose out on this dunya? And so on and so forth. These thoughts come to our minds, and they're valid to the degree that we must plan for the best of this world and the hereafter, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, that we ask for the best of this world and the best of the hereafter. However, we don't ask for the best of this world at the expense of the hereafter. It's important to ask ourselves, what is there truly to lose for excelling and pushing myself and my family forward in this endeavor of becoming closer to the Quran? And the benefit that that has is that the Quran becomes an intercessor for the individual who, again, we hear this word ashab, right? Shafi'a li ashabi. That's how it comes in the hadith. The Quran is an intercessor for its companion. And we have to understand that a companion is an individual who day and night, night and day, they're connected. Even when they're apart, they're thinking about how their actions are going to affect that companion. For example, when it comes to a husband and a wife, those two individuals, whether they're in the same household or one of them is traveling or whatever the case may be, and they're thousands of miles apart, or a son and a daughter, or a mother and a father. When we travel and we're thousands of miles away and we are returning back home, do we not think of the people we love from where we are and try to bring them back something? Bring them a gift? Or do we not call them every single day, see how they're doing? So this companionship, just as we have companionship in this world where we have extreme closeness and our thoughts are preoccupied with the person that we share that companionship with, and we always make sure that our actions befit that companionship. This is who the Quran will intercede for on the Day of Judgment. The individual that when he travels, he says, oh, the flight is going to take off, but guess what? Qim as-salah. This is a common theme of the Quran. Establish the salah. It's time to pray. I need to pray. Airport, no airport, masjid, whatever the case may be, I need to get it done. The individual who, when he's distressed financially, and there's an easy way out, swipe the credit card, but there's 25% APR. But the Quran states that riba is not halal. Interest is not an option. And that individual remembers those ayat of the Quran and he stops himself and finds another way. This is the companion that the Quran will intercede for. And lastly, again going back to the social hierarchy that we as humans have created within us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We crave to be endorsed and held in high regard amongst our peers. And that's not a problem within a limit. And again, we have to ask ourselves and look within to see how exactly we feel when we hear the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he tells us that خيركم من تعلم القرآن وعلمه, that the best of you are those who teach the Quran and learn it. This endorsement rings loud and clear and true and proud from the best of creation. We'd all feel great, even though, unfortunately, not to get into too much worldly things, but the President of the United States, right, the most powerful man in the world, as they say, if he were to give us a personal endorsement that this is a great guy, right now we might not feel so great about that, because maybe you had to do something bad to get that endorsement. But normally, just in a hypothetical situation, a person would be honored to receive a Medal of Honor from the President, a Purple Heart, or whatever the case may be, the Medal of Valor. All of these endorsements that they use to show that this individual has done something great. Any person who has received that and is a recipient of that would be honored, and all the individuals around him would be envious of the honor he's being shown. And the Prophet ﷺ has given each and every one of us an honor till the end of time with a very simple task. Learn the Quran. And learning the Quran is a lifelong journey. It never ends. A person cannot say to themselves, oh, I've mastered it, I'm good to go. It doesn't end like that. As the Prophet ﷺ reminded us, that the person who memorizes the Quran, he is like the owner of a camel. If he ties it, he will retain it. And if he does not, it will flee from him. So just in that manner, we must make sure that the Quran is something that we tie down. Next, we'll go into the worldly benefits of the Quran. So we see here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a theme in his sunnah, that the habits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when an action is extremely important for an individual, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He wants to encourage us to, when He wants to encourage us to do an action, He always puts for us a benefit in this world as well to go along with the benefit that we will achieve in the hereafter. So, as believers, when it comes to the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us many, many aspects of goodness in this life for our relationship with the Quran. So, number one, the best benefit that we will gain is we will become hooked deeper into the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through becoming closer to the Quran. Becoming closer to the Quran will help us and remove from us those barriers that stop us when it comes to our ibadah, when it comes to our adhkar, when it comes to our sadaqah. The Quran is such a dhikr that it constantly cleanses the heart. And so therefore, the individual who does have a close relationship with the Quran, his heart will be in such a state that he will be able to constantly And inshallah ta'ala, always do those actions which are more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this in and of itself, I'd like to highlight here, it doesn't remove the human element from our existence. As human beings, there are going to be times and days where we feel lazy. And there's going to be times and days where we're not up to the task. This is not what I'm saying here that we'll all of a sudden become angels because we read the Quran every day. We will still have temptation, we will still have whispers from the shaitan, but this will be our weapon that even in the moments when we fall short, or we do commit a sin, or we do make a mistake, that our relationship and our understanding of the Quran will have it to fall back on, so that therefore we'll be able to move forward. Because as the Prophet ﷺ told us, كل بني آدم خطاء وخير خطائين التوابون, that every single son of Adam is a sinner, will make mistakes. And the best of those who make mistakes are those who seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's repentance. So there's no avenue with which we're going to become perfect. So that, and the reason I bring this up is we should not allow the shaitan to convince us that I'm not worthy of Quran. Oh, I do this sin on a regular basis. I make this mistake on a regular basis. So now the Quran is not for me. I should just recite Fatiha and the three Quls and leave it at that. This is a very, very dangerous trick of the shaitan. Rather, the closer we get to the Quran and the more effort we make with the Quran, what will happen for us as individuals is our floor will become higher, and we will be able to leave out many of the problems and the barriers and the sins that we have had in our past. They'll be easily, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, removed. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran is ash-shifa lima fi sudur, that the Quran is a cure for that which is in the heart. And that means that all of the source of sinning, it comes from a heart that has marad, that has sickness within it. And therefore, as the person reads that Quran and it works as that cure, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated, then slowly but surely they will be able to reach that level where they leave off more and more of those mistakes that they are making and become closer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we have from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that a person should recite the last two ayat of Surah Al-Baqarah every night because they cannot be overcome. And in this hadith, there's a debate of what is it that cannot be overcome. Some say sihr, and some say that it's just a general remedy for all of your tasks, all of your obstacles in your life. And this is a very, very easy habit for us to all implement within our lives. Reciting from Amin al-Rasulu to the end of Surah Al-Baqarah at the end, after Asr or Maghrib every day, or before we go to sleep every day, and having that protection from the Quran as advised by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Next, we have Ayat al-Kursi, and this one I was debating in my mind whether to put it in the worldly benefits of the Quran or the fada'il of the Quran, the rewards of that a person gains from reciting the Quran. But ultimately, when we read the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he tells us that the person who recites Ayat al-Kursi, Surah Al-Baqarah, after every mandatory salah, that the only thing stopping that person from entering paradise is death itself. And after thinking upon this hadith, definitely Jannah itself is a reward and a benefit of the hereafter. However, being in a state that an individual is as close to Jannah as or has no barrier to his Jannah except him being removed from the earth or dying, this definitely means that that individual is in the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the person who's in the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his dunya cannot have any problem within it, in the sense that, okay, yes, he might have what we deem as a problem, but he has the tools within his heart that those obstacles cannot stop him. And in the end of the day, that's what we all seek. That's why the entertainment industry is as huge as it is, because everybody has a problem that they're trying to forget about. So they turn on Netflix, they turn on a movie, they listen to a song, they listen to a podcast, they do X, Y, and Z. Those are external remedy factors that do not, in the end of the day, have permanent solutions nor benefit us in the next life at all. However, for that individual who has the internal remedy factor of the Quran within his heart and his understanding of Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakeel and la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, that individual, just as we see in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, and today amongst the people of Gaza, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon them, that they have an internal remedy factor that has been built in within themselves from the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the Quran itself. So therefore, let the snipers come to them. They don't back down. No matter what their issue is, they are not fazed. Unfortunately, our children, without even bullying, yes, sometimes there is bullying, but I see this many times, without even being bullied, they'll shave their beards off. And you'll ask them, what happened? Oh, nobody else has one at my school. Did they make fun of you for it? No. Did they tell you not to do it? No. But I am so internally weak, unfortunately, that I rely on so much outside acceptance that I am unable to function, even thinking to myself that I look different from everybody else, even if it's a major factor of my deen. And this has to change for the individual who has a desire to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be at an elevated status. I'm not saying that an individual who finds himself in that situation is condemned. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying that there's a lot of growth to be had from that position. And now we have Surah Al-Mulk. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith that there is a surah of 30 ayat, which the one who recites it regularly it will come to save him from the punishment of the grave. And therefore we have again a common theme here that I'd like to highlight for all of us. We see what the Prophet ﷺ has done for us as in his incredible manner of teaching. He has automatically placed for us a daily wird of the Quran, a daily recitation of the Quran at separate times. See here, at the night time, last two ayat of Baqarah. And again, this takes 1 minute, by the way. Ayat al-Kursi after every salah, 45 seconds. Surah Al-Mulk, every day, most people say before sleeping, 3 to 4 minutes. So the Prophet ﷺ is showing us in real time exactly how we become these people of the Quran, exactly how we become a companion of the Quran, that not 5 or 6 hours can pass before I recite at least some portion of the Quran again. So we see here how we can implement this into our daily lives ourselves as well. And then we have Surah Al-Kahf. Now we have a weekly portion that we have to constantly renew and recite that the Prophet ﷺ told us, the one who memorizes the first 10 or the last 10 of Surah Al-Kahf, he will be protected from the fitna of Ad-Dajjal. And then we have an overall protection from harm that the Quran gives us. We know that when an individual is afflicted with magic or evil eye or sickness, that the recitation of the Quran has in many times been proven and shown to be a source of cure for that individual, even for non-Muslims. As we know from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were some Sahaba traveling and they entered upon a village and they asked them, can you guys host us? As this was a norm in that time, there were not necessarily hotels or so on and so forth. You rather entered a village, and when you entered that village, you asked some individuals to host you. And as was the hospitality of the Arabs, they hosted them. And so this time, unfortunately, they said no. And they said no, and said, we'll not host. And they left. Said, okay. And then there's their chief leader was bitten by a scorpion or some poisonous animal. And he entered the throes of death. He was going to die. And they became so desperate, all of the people in their village could not cure him, and they were finding no solution. And they remembered, okay, those people did just pass. Let's go see what they can do. And they went to them. And they said, what can you do for us? Help us. Our chief is going to die. And the Sahaba, they said that they're only going to do it with the price. You have to pay us for this. Because, again, they were not hosted. And they were in need of food. They were in need of shelter. So they needed to acquire that. And they made an agreement for some sheep. And he went into the tent and he recited Surah Al-Fatiha upon the chief who was inflicted with that poisonous bite. And after he did that, he was cured. And when he was cured, they asked him, what did you recite? And they told him, and he told them that he just said Al-Fatiha. And he recited Al-Fatiha and he was cured. So we see here that the Quran has a component of curing and helping from all types of harm, and again, even for non-Muslims. And to conclude the story very briefly, when those Sahaba, those individuals returned to the Prophet ﷺ, and again, this is a lesson that we can take here. There was not a moment in which they were not thinking, how will my action help me or harm me when it comes to my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He said, we took we charged a price for this thing. And I don't know if it's acceptable for me to eat from these sheep, because I charged, what did I charge for? For reciting Quran. And this was unknown to them. Can I accept a payment for the recitation of Quran? They were so cautious, the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. So they didn't eat until they went to the Prophet ﷺ. And then when they met him, they relayed to him the story, and he told them it's permissible. And to even put them at further ease, he said, even save me a piece, I want to eat from it too. So therefore we know for a fact that the Prophet ﷺ eating from it shows us of its permissibility. And this should teach us a lesson in our daily lives, that if we have a moment of doubt, and our fitrah, most of the time it will kick in. We'll have a moment where, is this 100% halal? Is this okay? I'm not sure. And we have, alhamdulillah, so many resources. Our Imam here, Imam Adhar, to ask questions to. We have many scholars around the area in Chicago to ask questions to, who will answer at a moment's notice. So we have no excuse to think to ourselves that, what's the big deal? Getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires that level of taqwa. Of acquiring that level requires that level of God consciousness. of constantly thinking to yourself, how will this affect my standing with my Lord? And lastly, an increase in rizq. There is a very weak hadith that says that reciting Surah Al-Waqi'ah on a nightly basis will save a person from poverty. And the reason I still share this hadith despite its weakness is that many of the individuals decided to do this action as number one, because it's not haram to act upon a weak hadith. And number two, if there's a good to be done, just because a weak hadith has entered the arena, that does not now discourage or disallow a person from doing that action. And there's no harm in reading Quran. So they now decided to read Surah Al-Waqi'ah every night. And many of these people have relayed that just this action in and of itself has been a major moment of change in that individual's financial situation, meaning that they received a huge increase in rizq, that their rizq increased after that, their financial burdens decreased after that. And so therefore we also see that one of the worldly benefits of the Quran is an increase in rizq. And now inshallah ta'ala to really highlight what we came here to kind of go over and elaborate today. How do we reach our Quran goals? Because much of what I've talked about, most of us already know. That's the reality of the situation. But how do we get from a position of knowing to a position of doing? How do we get to a position where my knowledge drives me to action? Number one is building the want and understanding the why. So, as a human being, if I don't have an internal desire for an object or a goal, it's not going to happen, or it's going to be very, very difficult for it to occur, come into fruition. So, for each individual, this is a different path. For some individuals, I want to, for example, as we just went over, I want my children to be protected from all the fitan and the tests that are out there. That's my why. That's what I want. That's what is going to drive me in this journey with the Quran. For other individuals, I'm in financial hardship. So that's my want, that's my why. That's what's going to drive me to become closer to my Quran. For other individuals, I want the knowledge. I want to be guided. That's my want, that's my why. For other individuals, it's the akhirah. I want to be of the people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meets, and He addresses me as a sahib al-Quran. And He tells me to recite. And with each verse, recite as I recited in this world, and with each verse I recite, I raise in rank. That's my want and that's my why. So we have to choose. And it might change throughout the course of our lives. But at each and every moment, we have to determine that there's a want and a why, and have it drive us to action. Because, for example, growing up, as boys in the school, all of us, we talked about cars. Oh, I want a Lamborghini, I want a Ferrari, I want these fancy, nice cars, fast cars, right? As in my age at this point, that's not a strong enough motivator for me to act upon. I don't want a Lamborghini so bad that I'm going to, I don't know, do what it takes to get that. My goal and my want is to support my family and to live comfortably. That's the goal for many of us here. So the reason I bring that up is that it can't be a want or a why that doesn't drive to action. That just sits in your mind like, okay, God, that would be so cool. But then what? If that's where it ends, it serves no benefit to anybody. It's actually just at that point useless. So it's very important for us to understand that if the want, oh yeah, I want my kid to be a Hafiz al-Quran, for whatever reason, I want myself to be fluent in reading Quran, or I want to memorize 5 juz, or I want to memorize 10 juz, and then it just sits there. I want it. That is a backwards way to deal with this issue. It cannot stop at just wanting it. That's the first step. And if there's no tangible change year after year, month after month, something has to change. A switch has to flip. And that's what we're going to go into in these next steps. So the next thing we have to work on to help that flip to switch is making sincere dua and intention. When it comes to the matters of the akhirah and even of this world, but more readily for the matters of the akhirah and seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure and guidance, when we ask Allah to guide us, when we ask Allah to help us to worship Him, most definitely He will not reject that dua from us when we're sincere. When we want it for a sincere and proper reason. Think of the times where we have found ourselves in hardship with our personal connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we begged of Him to remove that obstacle from our path that was impeding upon our faith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers those du'as with swiftness out of His mercy, because He loves for us to worship Him and He loves for us to draw close to Him. So therefore, we have to show that we want this enough to ask Him to grant it to us. We have to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of the people of the Quran. Whether it's after every salah, whether it's once a day, at some point we have to make sure that this is a habit that we have. And then one of the tricks that helps prompt action is understanding that and putting into the same category as my need and desire for food, for water, and so on and so forth, putting into those traits of our survival instinct, putting our akhirah into those same categories, and acting with the same chain of action that we use when we need to eat, when we need to sleep, when we need to do something that's crucial for our survival, and using those same steps for the actions of our akhirah. Meaning that, okay, I'm hungry, I'm on a road trip, and I'm not familiar with this area, I don't know where I am, but I want to have some halal food. So it's not as simple as the nearest rest stop, nearest McDonald's, or whatever the case may be. I might need to do some more research to find a Muslim-owned restaurant or whatever restaurant that sells halal food. It's a good objective. I've arrived at the objective, and this is where most of us, unfortunately, fall short. We say, okay, I don't see it immediately in front of me. I have no idea where or how it is or how to get there. And so we just stop. Imagine that person. They just stop. They just sit in the side of the highway or the middle of the road, and they don't do anything. And you ask them, well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to get this type of food from this type of place. But I don't know how to get there. I don't know what to do. Our instinct will drive us to move. Okay, I need to search in my phone. I need to go to a gas station and ask for direction. I need to do something to push me in the direction I'm trying to go. We constantly do this when it comes to the matters of our dunya. And we need to be able to understand that just as I'm able to, even without knowledge and the know-how, achieve my goals of the dunya, because they're crucial to my survival, I need to eat, we're able to accomplish those goals, regardless of the obstacles that stand in front of us. So when it comes to the Quran, sometimes there's a lack of know-how. Sometimes there is an inability to understand the next steps. But then even with that being the case, we must move. We must just try to do the next thing. Ask a person, search online, watch reputable imams and sheikhs talk about this issue, and seek the next advice and tips that they have to offer. And slowly but surely, an individual will reach their goal in this manner. And there are other practical steps I'd like to go over for us to be able to achieve this goal of getting closer to the Quran. When it comes to any objective that we have to be deliberate about achieving that objective. For example, we want our kids to be high school graduates. So for 12 years, every single day of the weekday, in the excluding the summer, we send them to school. And we don't say in kindergarten that he hasn't done algebra yet. This is a waste of time. What did I waste that year for? We understand that this individual is on a years-long journey. And in order for him to accomplish that, this is the first step. He has to know 1, 2, 3. Because without 1, 2, 3, or even ABC, algebra is Chinese to anybody. Because those are the crucial building blocks that this science is built upon. And likewise, just as we schedule that timing for them to learn for 12 years, we need to schedule for our children and ourselves that time and framework of how they will reach the level we want them to reach with the Quran. And ultimately, and I say this in earnest to all of us, the goal should be that all of the children sitting here should memorize the Quran in full. And the reason I say that is because many of us and you all grew up in a time where it was enough to know the 30th juz of the Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha, go to the masjid a couple times a week, and that person's iman would be safe. However, growing up in the society and the environment that we are in today, that is no longer the case. That is simply not enough to maintain a level of iman that will allow the individual to pray 5 times a day. Just putting it bluntly, based off the things that are being reported. Many individuals are struggling to wake up for their fajr, to pray, to even know why they're praying, to have a desire to worship Allah, and all of these things. And those are a result of the fact that we are living in a place where many of the things around us are detrimental to the iman of the individual. And they cause a person to become weaker and weaker and weaker in their faith. And so what do we do as a response to this? We build the faith through the actions that strengthen it. And memorizing the Quran itself is not enough. However, it is a crucial step in helping the person who has the Quran in their heart to have that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, After we schedule our time with the Quran, sometimes we will find ourselves still experiencing roadblocks in that journey with the Quran. And in that journey, when we face those roadblocks, one thing we should understand is the effects of sins and laziness on our overall iman in general. As the Prophet ﷺ told us that our heart has that singular black dot that we're all born with, that the Prophet ﷺ, his own was cleansed from his heart as a young boy by Angel Jibreel alayhi salam. And we understand that from the hadith, each and every sin a person does puts more of those black dots on that person's heart until that heart is sealed. And sealed from what? Sealed from iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection. Ameen. And we see from this that lifestyle changes have to occur when it comes to our belief and desire to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Quran in general. And I'd like to highlight here that it's not only the halal and haram that affect our relationship with the Quran and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our iman. But also, we have a very, very important and overlooked concept in our religion called al-lagh. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the mu'min in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. So, the individual who is a believer that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described as successful, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes them as a person who establishes their salah. And on top of that, they turn away from this word al-lagh. And very briefly, we see here that al-lagh is those things which are neither beneficial, meaning that they do not give a person good deeds, but they also may not, sometimes they are sinful, but not necessarily in and of themselves. Sometimes they are not actually sinful, but they do lead to increased ghafla in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what does that mean? That means that at the moment that the individual is engaging in that practice, they are not thinking actively of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and their dhikr and their remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not happening at that time. And so therefore, the more our heart engages in these moments where we are not connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what happens is that still puts a level of a veil on the person's heart. And the more that happens, the longer that heart stays in that state, eventually it will be a means to lead that person into actual sin and deeper and deeper and further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's important that we monitor our days and our children's days to make sure that they are actually productive and there is not too much time where a person is just loafing around. As the Prophet ﷺ reminded us and he warned us about laughter. Laughter is a crucial human emotion. We all must laugh. If a person does not laugh for a couple of days, there's a big problem. May Allah protect us. However, the Prophet ﷺ warned us from excessive laughter. Because excessive laughter, he says, it is a killer of the heart. So we must make sure that we're cognizant of the effect of our actions upon our heart when we're trying to build this relationship with the Quran. So there are 6 manners in which an individual can get closer to and build their relationship with the Quran. And we're going to conclude, inshallah, shortly. And these actions or avenues with which an individual gets closer to the Quran are, first and foremost, reading, listening, understanding, contemplating or tadabbur, memorizing or hifz, and applying or amal. So when it comes to reading the Quran, the first thing a person has to understand and do is they need to become proficient in their reading of the Quran. And this has many different benefits for the individual. I think first and foremost, the first thing that it solves is it solves that level of dread that I'm about to start struggling with something when it comes to the recitation of the Quran. Nobody likes to do an action that they know for sure is going to give them hardship, right? Even when let's not do an action like working out, for example. Many people shy away from it or running, these endurance runners. Many people shy away from these actions because there's inherent pain involved in doing them. We know that there's going to be difficulty. We know that I'm going to face a challenge in doing this action. So many people, they shy away from doing that, just based off of that. So when we talk about the action of reading the Quran, if I know that I'm going to face a level of resistance because I don't know the letters very well, I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to say when I see this and so on and so forth, it's going to automatically be a means for a person to be deterred from the Quran even subconsciously. And the next thing we need to do when we're doing this action and this trying to reach this goal of becoming proficient in the Quran and reading the Quran is you have to have a qualified and knowledgeable teacher. Because when we are trying to read the Quran, there are so many nuances and steps that need to be given attention to and understood so that the individual who is reading the Quran understands how to tie the words together with fluency. And one thing I'd like to highlight here, and as a warning for all of us, is I'm not automatically banishing online classes or saying that they are all bad and useless. That's not what I'm saying. But they are very dangerous when it comes to the learning and recitation of the Quran. And I'm not saying that as an individual who teaches Quran in person. I also taught Quran online and through virtual mediums before. However, one thing I've noticed to an alarming level is unfortunately the level of proficiency that's required to read the Quran properly is not attained many times in online classes. And I'd like you guys to think of it from a logical perspective. We have expansion that's being built behind us here. And every day I come and I see the workers doing their job. Now imagine me and you who have no background or knowledge in cement and excavation and all these things. We pick up our phone, we get on Skype, and we tell one of those workers to instruct us on how to build the building. Even if they try their best and they're qualified, this is not an attack against those teachers. I want to be very clear. Even if they try their best, they're qualified, they relay the information as properly as they can, something is bound to get missed. And then, eventually, we'll see that at some level in the construction of that building, there was a crucial step missed that might even result in catastrophic failure. And this is what I see many times in the recitation of those students who have been only practicing through an online medium. So I'd advise that if possible and when possible, always seek out in-person mediums for learning the Quran, because I believe that it is a more effective and safer manner to do so. Next, we have listening to the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وإذا قرئ القرآن فاستمعوا له وأنصتوا لعلكم ترحمون. Surah Al-Anfal, Surah Al-A'raf. That when we read the Quran, we should listen to it attentively and we should be quiet so that we may achieve mercy. And we should understand we should understand that even without understanding the Arabic in the Quran, that our hearts become cleansed through the listening of the Quran. And we also have the benefit that listening to the Quran soothes anxiety for the individuals who is listening to it at that time. And as we went over in the ayah in Surah Al-A'raf, that the individual who listens to the Quran with attentiveness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us that that individual will be the object of His mercy. And lastly, we have that individual who is listening to the Quran, it will help them with their reading and their memorization. In the sense that when that individual is listening to the Quran being recited in a fluent and proper manner, when they begin to read themselves, they will begin to subconsciously pick up on those habits that the qari, the person who is reading, that they're listening to, is also implementing in his reading. And therefore it will help them to become more proficient in their reading. And we know that there are many modes that it takes to memorize something, whether it's through visual input or auditory input. So therefore, the listening of the Quran helps the individual to become better in that objective. And we also know that listening to the Quran is rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in the hadith that tells us about Surah Al-Kahf, we know that the most rewarded way to implement this hadith is to read it ourselves. However, we're told that if we are unable to do so, we should also listen to it. So we should not just think that if we are unable to read, we are left out. We should try our best to listen, and this will help us to become better, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Next, we have the understanding of the Quran. And this is mainly achieved through translation of the Quran. So when it comes to the translation of the Quran, this will give us a very basic overview of the ayat and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to say to us and relate to us in His verses. And it's very important for us to seek out a proper translation that will help us to achieve this objective. In the sense that when I start to learn the commandments Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling me, when I start to hear about the qualities and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, this helps me as an individual get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and know my Lord. And therefore, this in and of itself is an inherent driver to becoming closer to the Quran itself. There are many good translations for an individual to read. For example, here we have the Clear Quran by Dr. Mustafa Al-Khattab, the Gracious Quran by Ahmed Zaki Hamad, and Ma'arif al-Quran. Forget the author, I think Taqi Uthmani or Chef Uthmani, I'm not sure which one it was. But it's a very common book that is easily attainable and has been translated into English as well. And just as we have a daily allotted portion of the Quran that we read as Muslims in Arabic, we should also have a daily allotted portion of the Quran that we read in the translation of our choice, so that therefore we're able to continue to build that relationship with the book that we are trying to engage with, so that it's not just all the time I'm reading this Arabic and I'm not able to understand what exactly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in these verses. But rather, I can slowly but surely go through at my own pace the English translation of these verses, so that therefore at some time, inshallah ta'ala, I will have been able to accomplish reading and understanding every single verse of the Quran, at least to the level where I understand the basic revelation that was sent. The second, or the fourth, I think we're on, thing that we can use to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Quran is at-tadabbur, the contemplation of the Quran. This tool is one of the most important motivators and catalysts when it comes to changing human behavior. So the first thing is tadabbur is done in different ways, but one of the most common ones that I have found is repeating an ayah slowly while thinking deeply on its meaning and source. And the source here meaning that who sent this ayah to me? Meaning that I'm thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His majesty, His greatness, while I'm doing the tadabbur and repeating this ayah and pondering over its meaning. And then as I'm doing this, I should be monitoring my heart. Am I thinking about, I always joke with my students that in Salah they should not think about biryani. That they should be thinking about something that's relevant to the actual source material of the ayah. And my mind should not be wandering to the different tasks that I have to do in this day or the different problems that I'm having, but rather strictly upon the verse that I am reciting and is the source of my contemplation. And the goal here is a change in behavior. We have a story from the time of Umar ibn Khattab that I want to go through very briefly. And there was a young man, a young individual who was known to contemplate and do tadabbur over the verse in Surah Al-Rahman, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ. And we also know that this is one of the most common verses that the Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu would read in his salah. And there was in the story it says that he was known to be a very handsome individual, and he was at one point solicited by a woman. And at this point, and again, this story is not, it has been verified through a single source. However, there is benefit to be gained from it, and it is not a story that we're basing the Sharia off of, but rather we're trying to extract lessons from. So therefore, we see that at this point, there are different forms of the story, but the form that I would like to tell is that he now became unconscious due to his desire and his want to follow his temptation into committing sin with this woman. And when he woke up, he now understood the reality of what just happened. That he was very close to falling into a sin and to committing something that would be detrimental to his akhirah and his status with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at this point it is said that he passed away out of the fear of not committing a sin, but wanting to and coming close to committing that sin. And then the story concludes that when Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu did not see this individual in the masjid for some time, he asked about him and he wondered where he was, and he was told that he passed away. And when he went to visit his grave, in this version of the story, it was said that he was given the ability to talk to this individual of the grave, and he recited this verse to him, and the person who was in the grave responded, said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted me these jannat, and even on top of that, blessed me with a third one out of his generosity. So we see here that he had a habit of contemplating the true nature of this verse, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ. And when that time came that he was tested, Was he tested in a manner in which he did not feel temptation? No, he felt the temptation. And he even took steps towards that temptation. However, there was a point in time where that tadabbur stopped him in his tracks. That time that he had taken to use those ayat to impact his heart, they came into play for him at that moment. And they allowed him to become an individual who fell short of falling into sin. And the second to last aspect that we're going to go over is memorization. And understanding that memorization is one of the most demanding and miraculous ways to engage with the Quran. As we know that all of the other books of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that were sent to the prophets previous, they were not memorized in full, word for word, letter for letter. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it possible for the Quran to be memorized in that manner. As we are reminded in Surah Al-Qamar, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the Quran has definitely been made easy for our remembrance, and how many of you or us will take heed of these ayat. And this also is a very difficult manner to engage with the Quran, because it requires a lot of persistence, dedication. And the person who is engaging in memorization, they have to be dedicated. They cannot simply be on and off or dilly-dally in this manner or this task. It's something that takes a lot of hard work and dedication. And we see in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ that in the months prior to him receiving revelation, he took the time to go to the cave of Hira and enter seclusion and ponder upon the purpose of his existence before even receiving wahi. And this is from the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this teaches us a lesson as believers, that if I want to engage in a more close approach with the Quran, it's important for me myself to make sure that I take steps to prepare my heart to receive the Quran. Meaning that an individual, number one, at the very minimum, they must be in a state where they are completing the farad ayn that are mandatory upon every believer. They have to be praying 5 times a day. They have to be doing the things that are demanded by them from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the very minimum when it comes to memorization of the Quran, because the Quran cannot come to the heart of an individual who is engaged in major sin. Meaning that, does that mean that a person has to be perfect to memorize the Quran? No. However, there has to be an effort to become better and qualified to receive the Quran with ease. And and we should also understand here that the shaitan will try to trick an individual and say, oh, I'm not good enough to memorize Quran. This is not the case. Rather, the individual has to work, try their best, and do what they can, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help them in their effort and take care of the rest. And lastly, the goal of memorization is to retain the ayat that are memorized, not to simply memorize the ayat and then forget them very shortly afterwards, because this will not be beneficial to the individual in the akhirah. We know that forgetting the Quran is a major problem and is very, very highly discouraged and sinful for the individual who does so purposefully. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ encouraged us, as we stated before in the hadith, that the individual who memorizes the Quran is like the owner of a camel. He must tie that camel in order to keep it, and if he does not, that camel will flee. And so therefore, as we're going through this journey of memorizing the Quran, we have to have a system in which we're able to retain it and make sure that our memorization is in a place where it's readily available to be recited. And that system is a fairly simple one. It consists of three parts, and part is obviously memorization. So let's just take, for example, an individual has memorized 4 juz of the Quran. They've memorized Juz Amma, Juz Tabarak, the last 2 juz of the Quran, and they've memorized the first 2 juz in the beginning of the Quran. So from Surah Al-Baqarah. So this individual, let's say that their new page that they're memorizing is from the first page of the 3rd juz. And this is a little bit technical, but I want you to bear with me to understand that there is a way in which the retention of the Quran becomes very, very easy, and the Quran becomes solidified in the mind of the individual who is memorizing it. So this person is memorizing the first page of the 3rd juz. That's their new memorization. That's the easy part. Now, there are 2 aspects that they need to engage in to make sure that the retention of that Quran happens. Number 1, they have to have a system in which they repeat the last 20 pages of their memorization every single day. Meaning that we need to transfer this memorization from the recent memory into the long-term memory. So this process of taking every single page of the last 20 pages that I memorized and reciting them every single day, it will mean that, hypothetically speaking, a person who memorizes 1 page a day or recites every single page he memorizes for another 20 days before he stops reciting it every single day. And in that time, it will become solidified within his memory. And after that, it's not forgotten, but rather it changes to the 3rd step in memorization, which is revision. And this is where the individual who is memorizing, their goal should be that every single juz that they know, or all the Quran that they know, all the ajzat that they know, that they recite all of them within a week. And so therefore, whatever is not in the last 20 pages I have memorized, this situation, in this example, meaning the first juz, the last 2 juz, they will be recited in a cycle of, it could be 1 juz a day, 2 juz a day, or even all 3 juz every single day. And this might seem redundant to all of us here. But rather, number 1, I always remind my students that, let's say they say, oh, I'm ready, so now I'm going to talk to my friends. But us reciting the Quran, actually, we're getting rewarded for every second that we do so. And number 2, the brain is like a muscle, just like all of our muscles on the outside of our body. So the more that we engage it in the recitation of these ayats, the stronger that the brain will be able to retain these ayat within the mind. And lastly, this is the last slide, inshallah we'll conclude and start Isha inshallah on time, is the application of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has not revealed this book simply for recitation and memorization, but rather a very crucial aspect and purpose of the revelation is for us to apply it within our lives and become better Muslims and become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and achieve the goal that we embarked upon when we started and we talked about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creating us, لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا, that to see which of us are going to do the best of deeds. So, with the understanding, with the contemplation, with the listening, with the reading of the Quran and the memorization of the Quran, the goal is to become better through all of these actions. not simply to do them for show and to do them in a manner that a person still sins and does not care about the hudud and the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even while doing them. And lastly, inshallah ta'ala, and we'll conclude with this, is the goal of all of this, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, Surah Al-Fatir, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. And meaning that the one who has the most awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those who have knowledge. And the more knowledge we gain with the Quran, the closer we get to the Quran, the goal is that our awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases. That at every single moment of our day, we try our best to make sure that every action we do brings us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not further away from Him. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to be a people who understand the importance of memorization of His book. And I'd like to end with saying that I hope that all of us here with children and all of us here as adults ourselves too, we take advantage of the opportunity in front of us with our new program where we are offering schooling with secular education, math, science, social studies, all of these things, and full-time hifz. And the goal here is that within 3 to 4 years, any child or individual who takes part in this program will be a full Hafiz of the Quran. And this is a great opportunity to and uphold the standard of the ulama of our past, who were the best and knowledgeable in the matters of the dunya, and that did not allow them to sacrifice in their knowledge of deen either. And the last thing I'll say is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us to be hasty in the actions of good. So don't allow shaitan, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, "Ash-shaytanu ya'idukum al-faqr," that the shaitan will try to convince us of every single avenue that this can go wrong. Oh, I take him out of school. What if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? All of these things will be taken care of by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the proper trust in. And I hope, inshallah ta'ala, that all of us here will be able to take advantage of this opportunity. And I encourage all of you to enroll your children in this new program and reap the benefits of having a child and a family that is attached to the Quran bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to be raised on the Day of Judgment as Sahib al-Quran, and that the Quran is a shafi' lana la alayna, for us, not against us. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to be a people who act upon all of the commandments and prohibitions of the Quran, and that He allows us to be close to it till our dying day. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك